Lower your eyes, or you won't last a week here. That was the first thing Mateo whispered to the new waitress as she stepped into Le Clermont, the most expensive restaurant in Sao Paulo, where crystal chandeliers glittered overhead and every table looked like it belonged in a magazine. The new hire, Aisha Reed, had been unemployed for 3 months. Her savings were gone. Her confidence was fraying. This job wasn't a dream, it was survival. The manager, Claudia Viana, greeted her with a tight professional smile and a handshake that felt more like a warning. Rules were recited like commandments: perfect posture, perfect timing, perfect silence. "Our guests don't pay for food," Claudia said. "They pay for an experience. One mistake can cost you your position." Aisha nodded, swallowing her nerves. But as the lunch prep began, she noticed something odd. Staff flinching at the front door, voices dropping, shoulders tightening like a storm was approaching. Mateo kept glancing at the entrance, as if expecting a catastrophe to walk in wearing perfume. Finally, he leaned close. "There's one guest who doesn't come to dine," he said. "She comes to dominate." Her name was Vivian Marquez, wife of millionaire tycoon Renato Marquez. She didn't just complain. She humiliated. She made grown men tremble and seasoned chefs crumble. The entire restaurant changed when she appeared, as if fear itself had a reservation. Aisha listened, heart-pounding, and told herself it had to be exaggerated. Then the room went suddenly violently quiet, like someone had turned off the air. And in the doorway, Vivian stepped in. Aisha's first days at Le Clermont passed in a blur of polished silverware, whispered corrections, and aching feet. From dawn until late afternoon, she learned the choreography of luxury, how to fold napkins at the exact angle, how to balance a tray without a tremor, how to smile without being seen. Every movement had rules. Every second was measured. Mateo stayed close, showing her the unspoken rhythms of the place. He had worked there for 7 years, long enough for exhaustion to settle behind his eyes. He was patient, precise, but there was something else in his gaze. Not anger, not sadness. Fear carefully controlled. "You're learning fast," he told her one afternoon, adjusting a place setting. "That's good. Just remember, skill won't protect you from everything here." Aisha laughed softly, trying to lighten the moment. "You make it sound like a battlefield." Mateo didn't smile. He checked over his shoulder, lowered his voice. "Listen to me. When Vivian Marquez walks through that door, this stops being a restaurant. It becomes a test, not of service, but of submission." Aisha frowned. "Everyone's afraid of one customer. She's not just a customer," Mateo said quietly. "She decides who stays and who disappears. People lose jobs here without warnings, without explanations. One word from her, one call to her husband, and it's over." Aisha felt a chill run through her chest. She thought of the months she'd spent sending resumes into silence, of rent overdue, of promises she'd made to herself to survive with dignity. "So what do you do?" she asked. Mateo's answer was barely a whisper. "You lower your eyes. You don't react. You endure." Aisha nodded, but something inside her tightened, because endurance had kept her alive, but it had never felt like living. The night Vivian Marquez returned, fear arrived before she did. Aisha was serving a quiet table. When the room suddenly shifted, conversations dimmed, forks paused mid-air, and even the music seemed to hold its breath. It was subtle, but unmistakable. Then she saw her Vivian gliding across the dining room like she owned not just the space, but the people inside it. Perfect hair, perfect dress, a smile that never reached her eyes. A young waitress named Elena was sent to greet her. Elena's hands shook as she approached tray balanced with water and menus. "Good evening, Ms. Marquez. Welcome back." Vivian didn't look up. Seconds stretched. 10, 20, 30. The silence was deliberate, designed to make the girl feel small. Finally, Vivian lifted her gaze with icy precision. "Why are you so slow?" she asked calmly, cruelly. "Do they hire anyone here now?" Elena stammered, apologizing, trying to explain. "That was a mistake." Vivian leaned forward, her voice sharpening. "Do you know who I am? Do you know who my husband is?" The words weren't questions. They were weapons. Across the room, Claudia rushed over, face pale. Without hesitation, she dismissed Elena on the spot, sending her to the kitchen as tears spilled freely down her cheeks. No defense, no explanation, just removal like erasing a stain. Aisha watched heart-pounding fists clenched at her sides. No one spoke. Not the guests, not the staff. Plates were cleared, wine was poured, and life went on as if nothing had happened. By the end of the night, Elena was gone. The next day, no one mentioned her name. It was then Aisha understood. This wasn't arrogance. This was ritualized cruelty, and everyone had learned to survive by pretending they didn't see it. After that night, Le Clermont no longer felt like a workplace. It felt like a warning. During a short break, Aisha found Matteo standing in the narrow alley behind the restaurant, a cigarette trembling between his fingers. She had never seen him smoke before. The city lights reflected in his tired eyes, making him look older than his years. "She's done this before, hasn't she?" Aisha asked quietly. Matteo exhaled slowly. "More times than I can count." He told her about Lucas, a sommelier with a decade of experience, fired on the spot because Vivian claimed the wine recommendation insulted her palate. About Helena, the former floor manager dismissed because Vivian arrived without a reservation and refused to wait even once. Careers erased with a phone call. Years of loyalty undone in minutes. "She doesn't just complain," Matteo said, voice hollow. "She hunts." Aisha felt something twist in her chest. "Why does no one stop her?" "This is abuse." Matteo laughed softly without humor. "Stop her with what courage doesn't pay rent. I have 2 daughters, 7 and 9. I need this job." He crushed the cigarette under his shoe. "So we follow the rule." What rule, Aisha asked, though she already knew. When Vivian Marquez walks in, he said, meeting her eyes, you disappear. You don't argue. You don't defend yourself. You survive. Aisha nodded, but the word survive echoed uncomfortably in her mind. She had survived unemployment. She had survived rejection. She had survived being overlooked, underestimated, invisible. But watching good people slowly break under deliberate cruelty felt different. As she returned inside the dining room, gleaming and quiet, Aisha realized something unsettling. Fear had become part of the service. Silence had become the price of staying. And she wasn't sure how long she could pretend that was normal. Monday arrived with a sentence that felt like a verdict. "Isha, you'll be serving Vivian Marquez tonight." The words came from Claudia, spoken calmly during the morning briefing, but the room stiffened instantly. Matteo looked at Aisha with something between apology and fear. Everyone knew what this was. A test. Not of skill, but of obedience. At exactly 8 o'clock, Vivian entered Le Clermont like a ruler inspecting her territory. Emerald dress, razor-straight posture. That familiar silence spread through the room as she took her seat by the window and crossed her legs. Aisha approached, her heartbeat steady but loud in her ears. "Good evening, Miss Marquez. My name is Aisha. I'll be taking care of you tonight." Vivian's eyes traveled slowly over her measuring weighing. "You're new." "Yes, ma'am." "Bring me still water." 3 ice cubes. "Exactly. Cold, but not cold enough to dull my palate." "Lemon. Thin slice." It was impossible by design. Aisha returned once. "Too much ice." Again. "Not enough." A third time. Vivian finally took a sip. "Acceptable." Then came the food demands, wrapped in threats, perfection dismissed with boredom. When the dish arrived flawless, Vivian didn't touch it. Instead, she lifted the glass of water and, without breaking eye contact, tipped it onto the polished floor. "Oops," she said flatly. "Clean that." Every gaze in the restaurant turned away. This was the moment people disappeared. Aisha knelt, cloth in hand, the marble cold beneath her knees. She could feel the triumph radiating from Vivian, another person reduced. But as she wiped the spill, Aisha did something no one ever did. She looked up, not with anger, not with fear, with quiet, unshakable dignity. And for the first time, Vivian Marquez blinked. The room never spoke about what happened next, but everyone felt it. Vivian Marquez finished half her meal in a silence so tight it hurt to breathe. No complaints, no theatrical sighs, just the slow clink of cutlery against porcelain. When she stood to leave, she placed an extravagant tip on the table, smooth and deliberate, like punctuation at the end of a threat. She didn't look at Aisha again, but Aisha knew better than to mistake that for mercy. As the door closed behind Vivian, the restaurant exhaled quietly, guiltily. Mateo caught Aisha's eye from across the room, his face pale. He didn't smile. He shook his head once, barely noticeable. That look said everything. You shouldn't have done that. In the service hallway, Claudia pulled Aisha aside. Her voice was low, controlled. You crossed a line, she said. She doesn't forgive challenges. Not even small ones. Aisha nodded. I understand. But what she understood wasn't fear, it was inevitability. Because power like Vivian's doesn't retreat, it regroups. The next day, Vivian returned. And the next. Each visit quieter, colder, more calculated. She stopped targeting Aisha directly. Instead, she turned outward toward Mateo, toward the chef, toward anyone connected to that moment of defiance. Wine descriptions stretched endlessly. Orders changed mid-sentence. Impossible standards resurfaced. Smiles sharpened into weapons. Aisha watched it unfold with a growing weight in her chest. That look she'd given Vivian, the calm refusal to disappear, had cracked something. And cracks don't heal inside people who rule by fear. They widen. Aisha realized then the night she knelt and looked up hadn't ended anything. It had started a war. And this time Vivian Marquez wasn't playing to humiliate. She was playing to destroy. That night didn't end with raised voices or broken glass. It ended with something far more dangerous: memory. Vivian Marquez left the restaurant calm, composed, almost elegant. But beneath that control, something had shifted. Aisha felt it in the days that followed, in the way the air tightened whenever Vivian's name appeared on the reservation list. The fear hadn't vanished. It had sharpened. Vivian returned again. And again. Not loudly, not impulsively. Strategically. She stopped attacking Aisha directly. Instead, she targeted the people around her. Mateo was first. Long wine explanations. Impossible reversals. No, I don't want that one. Start again. His voice grew hoarse. His hands clenched behind his back. Then the chef. Then the manager. Vivian moved through the staff like a storm that never touched the ground twice, leaving destruction without leaving fingerprints. Aisha watched it happen, guilt tightening in her chest. That single look, the refusal to lower her eyes, had exposed something Vivian couldn't tolerate. Not rebellion, equality. And people who built their power on fear cannot survive being seen as equal. One afternoon, Aisha found Mateo in the storage room, staring at the wall. His shoulders slumped. She's breaking us on purpose, he whispered, one by one. Aisha didn't answer. She didn't have one. Because she understood the truth now, Vivian wasn't angry anymore. She was offended. And for people like her, offense demands punishment. The restaurant still sparkled. Guests still laughed. Plates still arrived perfectly arranged. But beneath the luxury, something was cracking. Aisha had stepped out of line, and the system was responding exactly as it was designed to. The question was no longer whether she would pay a price. It was how high that price would be, and who else would be forced to pay it with her. Friday night was packed. Every table at Le Clermont was filled, crystal glasses chiming with laughter, families celebrating birthdays, couples leaning close in soft light. From the outside, it looked like perfection. Then Vivian Marquez chose her moment. She had been quiet all evening. Too quiet. 40 minutes of polite behavior, normal orders, calm expressions. Some of the staff dared to hope the storm had passed. It hadn't. Mateo, could you come here, please? Vivian's voice was sweet. dangerous. Matteo approached her table. Shoulders squared, professionalism carved into every movement. "How may I assist you, Ms. Marquez?" She lifted her wine glass, pointing to a spot that didn't exist. "This glass is dirty." Matteo examined it carefully. It was flawless. "I don't see a mark, ma'am." Vivian stood slowly, her voice rising just enough for nearby tables to hear. "After 7 years here, you still can't clean a glass properly. How tragic." The room went silent. Then she smiled. "You have children, don't you, 2 daughters?" Matteo froze. "You want them to be proud of you, yes," she continued. "Then let me teach you right now how a professional does this." For 10 endless minutes, Vivian made him demonstrate imaginary corrections. Turn the glass, again. Slower. No wrong. She spoke to him the way one scolds a child, pointing out flaws that weren't there, laughing softly as tears slipped down his face. No one intervened. Not the guests, not management, not the city that praised this place for elegance. In the kitchen afterward, Matteo collapsed against the wall, shaking. "My daughters think I'm a hero," he whispered to Aisha. "How do I face them after this?" Aisha felt something break open inside her. This wasn't service anymore. This was public execution, and she knew deep in her bones that silence had just become complicity. The silence broke with a voice no one expected. "Mommy, why is that lady being mean to the waiter?" It came from a small table near the center of the room. A little girl, 5 years old, at most curly hair tied with a pink ribbon, feet swinging beneath her chair. Her question wasn't loud, but it cut through the tension like glass. The restaurant froze. Her mother turned pale. "Sweetheart, eat your food," she whispered urgently, reaching for the child's hand. "Be quiet." But the girl frowned, confused. "But she made him cry," she said louder now. "My teacher says making people cry on purpose is bullying." A ripple of unease moved through the guests. Heads turned. Forks stopped. Even the music seemed to falter. Vivian Marquez turned slowly in her chair, her gaze locked onto the child. "Well," Vivian said softly, dangerously, "children should learn when to stay quiet." Perhaps her parents didn't teach her manners. The girl shrank back, startled tears filling her eyes. Her father stood up immediately, placing himself between Vivian and his daughter. "She's 5, he said firmly. She asked a question. Vivian smiled, a thin, cruel curve of her lips. "Then she should apologize. Right now." "No," the father replied, voice shaking but steady. She told the truth. The room held its breath. Aisha felt her heart pounding so loudly she was sure others could hear it. She watched the little girl clutch her mother's arm, watched Vivian step closer, watched fear bloom where innocence had spoken. That was the moment something inside Aisha snapped into clarity. This wasn't about staff anymore. This wasn't about power. This was about a child learning whether truth was something to be punished or protected. And Aisha knew she could no longer stand still. Aisha stepped forward before fear could catch up with her. She placed herself between Vivian Marquez and the trembling little girl, her back straight, her voice steady. "The child has nothing to apologize for," she said clearly. She told the truth. The restaurant stopped breathing. 80 people, families, couples, executives froze in place. Matteo appeared at the kitchen door, eyes wide. Claudia's hand flew to her mouth. No one had ever stood there before. No one had ever spoken to Vivian like that. Vivian turned slowly, disbelief flickering across her face before hardening into rage. "Do you know who I am?" she hissed. "I know exactly who you are," Aisha replied, calm as stone. "You're someone who uses your husband's money to humiliate people who can't fight back." A gasp rippled through the room. Vivian laughed, sharp and cold. "You've just ended your career. I'll make sure you never work in this city again." "Maybe," Aisha said, taking one small step forward. "But while I'm here, you will not intimidate a 5-year-old child." Vivian raised her hand, trembling with fury. The room waited, some in horror, some in hope. Aisha didn't flinch. She didn't look away. "Go ahead," she said quietly. "Do it. Let everyone here see exactly who you are." For the first time, Vivian Marquez hesitated. Her hand fell. The power she wielded, built on silence and fear, cracked in front of witnesses. Without another word, Vivian grabbed her bag and walked out, heels echoing through a stunned quiet that felt like freedom. Aisha stood there shaking. knowing one thing with absolute clarity. She hadn't just defended a child. She had broken the spell. For a long moment after Vivian Marquez left, no one moved. Then the restaurant exhaled, slowly, shakily, like a body that had been holding its breath for years. Conversations didn't immediately return. Laughter felt inappropriate. What lingered instead was a quiet, electric awareness something irreversible had just happened. Aisha stood frozen near the table, her hands trembling now that the danger had passed. The courage that had carried her forward drained all at once, leaving behind fear, doubt, and a single thought pounding in her chest. "I'm done here." Guests began whispering. Some nodded at her with something like respect. Others avoided her eyes, uncomfortable with having witnessed the truth out loud. Mateo approached slowly, his face wet with tears he didn't bother to hide. "You didn't just stand up for that child," he whispered. "You stood up for all of us." In the manager's office, Claudia sat in silence, staring at the wall, as if replaying the scene over and over. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked. "In 23 years, she said, I've never seen anyone do what you did tonight." Aisha swallowed. "Am I fired?" "I don't know," Claudia answered honestly. "Vivian's husband is a partner. This could end very badly for you." Then she paused. "But whatever happens, thank you." Someone needed to say it. That night, Aisha went home expecting the worst. But by morning, the story had already escaped the walls of Le Clermont. Videos filmed by guests were everywhere shared, replayed impossible to erase. And for the first time, the power that had thrived in shadows was standing in full light, exposed, undeniable, and no longer untouchable. The call came on Monday morning, not from a lawyer, not from security, from Renato Marquez himself. Aisha was asked to step into the manager's office. When she entered, Renato stood by the window, tailored suit, calm posture, the kind of presence that usually silenced rooms. But when he turned to face her, there was no anger in his eyes. Only exhaustion. "You're Aisha Reed," he said quietly. "The waitress who stood up to my wife." Aisha nodded, bracing herself. "I came for 2 reasons," Renato continued. "First, to apologize." The word landed heavier than any threat ever had. He sat down, rubbing his temples. "I received 12 videos. 12. From different guests. I watched my wife humiliate a father in front of his children. I watched her intimidate a 5-year-old. And then I watched you, someone who earns in a month what I spend on a Thai show, more dignity than every powerful adult in that room." Aisha felt her throat tighten. "I enabled this," Renato admitted. "By staying silent. By calling it stress. By letting power rot into cruelty." He looked at her directly. "We're separating. She needs help. And I should have demanded it years ago." He slid an envelope across the desk. Inside 3 months' salary and a personal letter of recommendation. "This isn't hush money," he said. "It's protection. My name carries power. Some people will try to close doors on you for what you did. This letter will open others." Before she left, he paused. "When you have children someday, I hope they have your courage. The world changes only when someone finally says, 'This stops here.'" Aisha walked out knowing one truth. She hadn't just survived that night. She had changed it. 2 months later, Le Clermont no longer felt like a place ruled by fear. The chandeliers were the same. The tables still gleamed. But something invisible and essential had shifted. People stood a little straighter. Laughter came easier. Silence was no longer used as a weapon. Mateo had been promoted to assistant manager. He smiled more now, spoke louder, went home each night knowing his daughters would still see him as a hero. Claudia stopped flinching at the door. And Aisha, the woman who had once been warned to lower her eyes, kept her job. Not because she was protected by power, but because power had finally been confronted. One evening, as Aisha served a family, a little girl looked up at her and asked, "Are you the brave lady from the video?" Aisha smiled gently. "No," she said. I just didn't pretend everything was okay when it wasn't. And that was the truth. Real courage doesn't always look loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's simply refusing to stay silent when silence hurts someone else. Evil doesn't survive because it's strong. It survives because too many good people look away. The moment one person chooses dignity over fear, the balance shifts. So, here's the question for you. Have you ever witnessed something wrong and wondered whether to speak up or stay safe? What would you do if telling the truth meant risking everything? Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every one. If this story touched your heart, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that one voice is enough to change a room. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply say, "This stops here."